And
All right.
if you've got anything topical, then that's wonderful for people too.
All right. Well, hello, everyone. And my name is Lora Woodward, and I'm the Communications Director here at the Kinder Institute. And we are live with different conversationalists from around the globe, mostly centered here in the US and in the UK, talking about what's going on with the Golden Civilization conversation movement. And what's been exciting is just what's occurring in Scotland and Northern England, as well as southeastern England, with George's trip to the UK. He's already been able to lead 3 Golden Civilization conversations. He's had many different conversations individually with important individuals. And then he's sitting next to Julian Powe, who is our leader as an ongoing conversationalist.
Speaking about important individuals.
Very, very important. This might be a comedy show. But we're really excited to have Julian and George and Michael, who is one of our newest conversationalists, Kathy, and then myself and Natalie from the Kinder Institute here on the call to support the work that we're doing, because we have had hundreds of conversations happening over the last year, and it's really exciting. And some of the different conundrums that we face are, how do we keep the meetings going? And that's going to be the main theme of what we're discussing today. But also just to hear from George, kind of who's live and in the action, how things are going from his perspective, as well as Julian, because he's been able to have a group meet for the past year on a regular basis, and they have a really exciting project that I think that everyone would be encouraged to hear about. And so today's agenda is really focused on hearing what's happening in the movement, being able to kind of hold a discussion about how do we keep groups continuing to meet, and then answering any questions from anyone who is new to the conversation movement and how they might be able to kind of get that burst of energy to hold their first conversation. So I'll leave it back, turn it back to you, George.
Great, Laura. That's a fabulous organizational structure for us and inspiring. I'd like to leap right into the details, but in a way I feel it's important to just check in with everybody first. And also, Julian and I had a really marvelous conversation already, as you might imagine, in the last few hours. And I'd like to share some of the thoughts that came out of that conversation, which has to do with what's been happening globally, what we've seen, which is really quite exciting. And Michael has added to that because he really helped tremendously get the North Country, so to speak, although again, I don't know if we can still call it that. Anyway, he organized something that was really dynamic in Scotland that included family and friends and colleagues, and I got to meet two of my favorite people were his mother and his aunt.
You tell me about mother and aunt.
Yeah, really wonderful, wonderful family. And then a wonderful mentor that he had in the financial world, but many really good people there that we've actually been communicating with. And then several other events, and Michael came on to the second event, which was probably the most dynamic event in Glasgow. So maybe Michael, you'd like to share, and then we'll check in just briefly with Natalie and Kathy to see if they have anything to add, and then we'll check in with Julian and then go at the detail. You know, what are the issues that we might wrestle with, and what are the obstacles, and what action steps and commitments we might take coming out. So Michael, it was wonderful to have that time with you.
Thanks for coming. We had a good time. The Monday evening went really well, I thought, and I've had some really good feedback from that already, with a couple of people keen to meet up again in December to try and move it forward as a group. So that's positive. And then the Tuesday afternoon meeting over in Glasgow, I thought finished really well with 2 people volunteering to take forward the Golden Civilization in Glasgow. So hopefully that'll follow through. I've followed up as far as I can on that with the CISI. So it's really up to the CISI to email out the attendees after that. But they've got the photos of the flip charts and that you've got as well. Interesting that very similar things came out on both both events and you say, you know, it's the world over, that very similar things come out every time you do that activity.
Yeah.
I'd be interested to hear your thoughts, how it compared to the other 70 or so golden civilizations you've done.
Yeah, well, before I go, I don't want to steal your thunder because, I noticed that too, and it's something I've noticed all along. I'm wondering what you saw. Were there things that were different? And if so, what were they?
So it was a more financial community on the Tuesday, and I think that they maybe got a bit more excited because you started talking to them about financial planning and life planning, and they understand that a bit better. Before you move on to life planning communities and a golden civilization conversation, I think there was probably a bit more energy in the room at the end of the Glasgow meeting compared to the Edinburgh meeting. But the feedback's been good from Edinburgh. So
yeah, right. I would concur. I'd say they were equally excited and engaged. There was a difference. The Edinburgh meeting was at night.
Yeah.
And we had people had a glass of wine. So and whereas the other meeting was kind of in the middle of the business day, and it was and the Edinburgh meeting had people who were, I'd say the average age was probably 10 or 15 years older than the Glasgow meeting. I could be wrong.
Yeah.
So the people in Glasgow were more kind of in a work modality, just in their general life, as opposed to any kind of retirement modality.
Yeah.
So there was a kind of energy that came from that that I think was really interesting. But you could go either way. With people who are retired, there's often an ease and a sense of ownership. I thought the ownership of democracy and of democratic freedoms was strong in both communities. And it was really exciting for me to be in Scotland, where many of these ideas were formulated and people were debating them. And, back in the 18th century when I think mostly of Adam Smith, but there were great philosophers up there with him. Edinburgh was the center of intellectual activity, and Glasgow was a huge center, obviously, of industry and commerce. So to me, it almost felt like there was that energy was still there, the passion, the understanding of it, the dedication to it. And I think that was what I felt more from Scotland than from any other. That was at each of the cultures that we've gone to. Hey there's Pamela. Good to see you.
Hi.
So each of the cultures that we've been to have had, I was talking to Julian, there's always been a similarity, and that's what Michael was noticing, a tremendous similarity, particularly in that circle that we start off with the golden civilization. But then there's slight nuances. And the nuance that I felt in Scotland was had to do with democratic freedoms, freedom of markets as well. The only place that I would say I have felt it as strong, possibly, there are a couple of places maybe. One is Hong Kong, of course, where there's a passion for it, but there's more of a tentativeness about, can we have it? Is this allowed? All of those things. And I'm assuming that Rohit is the one who's on without a camera. Is that true? Rohit, are you there?
Yes, hi, it's Rohit here.
Wonderful.
Sorry
wonderful.
to disturb you.
Is there any chance you could come on with camera? Because it'd be lovely to see you.
Let me try.
All right, very good. I'm going to keep talking. I just had a marvelous time. And Michael, I do want to thank you again, because you not only arranged the whole thing in Edinburgh and brought all of your friends and colleagues, and it was a stronger number than I'd expected. And I was so pleased with the conversation. But then you came all the way over to Glasgow and really held court there with me up in front of the audience, really supporting the movement. So really just great thanks, huge appreciation, because it's a lonely it's a lonely, sometimes I feel like a used car sale, not a used car, but a salesman traveling from city to city, and just wonderful to have a colleague, a comrade doing it.
No, well, I was delighted to have you there because I've been promising that you would come for the last 2 or 3 years. So we finally got you there.
That's great. And I remember 3 people, I don't know if you realize, but Colin, the man who organized the thing, was actually just as eager as the tall, bearded fellow from Morgan Stanley, and then Barney or Barry, whatever his name was. Colin came up to me and said, I'm eager to do this. I'd be happy to facilitate. So we might talk about how we go forward with them,
Cool.
maybe in a minute. But your presence, and it was also wonderful to see how people came up to me and said that you were the reason that they were there, that you'd spoken about life planning at a meeting of some sort, and they were so inspired by what you shared that they came on your authority. So I just, again, want to applaud your leadership.
Wow. That's kind, but I'm just telling them about you, George. So,
well, I don't know, but there's something that you carried inside of you, and a quiet leadership that I just want to applaud.
Okay, thank you.
For it. So let's see. We've had Rohit looks like he's not on yet, but we'll see. Unless there's a second room. No. So Pamela, we're just sharing a little bit about our own experience right now, and then we're going to dive into this question again of how are we moving forward. There he is. Hey, Rohit, good to see you. Pamela, would you like to share anything at all?
No. I guess I would say that I'm trying to bring the essence and the ideas of the Golden Civilization to all of the different work that I'm doing. And it's inspiring me to take some risks and some ideas and initiatives that I have that I think are important, and trying to do them.
Great. Next time here. And context you do and what you've done had time, we would really dive into, because Pamela, and I encourage any of you to reach out to Pamela if she's willing as a resource. I'm sure she is, because she's done so much work with Parker Palmer, with democracy. I mean, just really at the heart of what we're talking about, if we're to have a sustainable movement toward a golden civilization, Pamela's got a lot of the texture of what that, the facilitative wisdom around communication as well. So just thank you for being on the call. And I want to make sure I come back, and I'll make sure Julian reminds me of this, but I had a conversation yesterday with another person who is really, I think, doing something unusual in the world of economics and democracy, and with an integral format, if those of you who know Ken Wilber's work. And I've had some thoughts that I've shared with Julian about it, and I want to share with all of you in terms of just deepening my understanding of where we're going with this work. So I'll share a bit of that in a moment. But let me hop over to Natalie for a moment to see if you've got anything to add. I know Natalie's just joined us at Kinder Institute. We're so glad to have her, and she's already contributed quite a bit. You're on mute, so you'll have to take yourself off mute. But is there anything you'd like to share to introduce yourself to us? And you're on mute, so we can't hear you. Oh, there you are. There you are.
I just unmuted. So hi, I'm Natalie. I just started. This is my second full week, so really just started. I have read or like followed along listening to Golden Civilization. I'm definitely excited about kind of like the work that's already been done, helping like working closely with Lora about like press and general like media and website representation and marketing. So I feel like this meeting will really help to see like what kind of themes we're bringing out and that sort of thing.
Wonderful. We're so glad you're here and you're part of us. We had one of the things we'll talk about just briefly, but the one of the things that's held us back these last few months is we lost one of our staff members who was doing a lot of what Natalie has come on to do, and so there was a lot of follow-up that we weren't able to do, even with as great a staff as we've got. So we're very excited to have Natalie joining us and learning and participating. Thank you, my friend. And let's see, let's go to Rohit. Would you like to share a little bit? And then we'll move to Kathy and come back to Julian and me. You're on mute. Let's see. You're on mute still. Can you unmute or?
Here, that should be unmuted now. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great. Hi, I'm Rohit Sakhuja, and George and I met a few weeks ago after I came to his talk on the Golden Civilization, the book, and here at the Harvard Coop. And so, and I had known about George's work and had actually taken the 5-day course about close to about a decade ago or so.
Way back at its beginnings, yeah.
So just and have just and my own background is so had liked his work. I really liked his work then, and just so interesting what George and you all are doing now with the Golden Civilization, and just love the ideas. And I have a sort of a kind of a little bit of an eclectic background, but I've spent some time at actually probably most relevant to the Golden Civilization. I've spent some time at an MIT think tank. And where we were looking at in that particular case, we were looking at the climate change problem, and really the challenge. What we were looking at was that if you take this problem of reducing carbon emissions by 80%, this goal of the goal that President Obama had set, that if you looked at all the different constituencies that were involved in this, there was no one constituency. There are companies that have their own set of goals and might have to comply with regulations and might do some PR things or other things to some things they'll do will hurt the goal. Some things they do may help the goal depending on exactly what they're doing. There are nonprofits that may be that may have the best intentions and best heart and mind, but likely don't have the scale to do anything close to the challenge. And there's the government, which has multiple interests and multiple and kind of changes every 4 years. And the challenge was to sort of look at this and say, who's really thinking? How do you integrate all these different pieces and these different groups to really address this this global challenge that we have? And I think that's sort of what I found the work that as I listened to George's talk on the Golden Civilization and some of the ideas, it's like no one is thinking with this, or there's just not enough people who are thinking with this sort of kind of very global perspective. So I certainly, and I thank you so much for inviting me, and I appreciate just being able to engage with you here.
Well, it was really exciting, Rohit. It's been really exciting getting to know you and meeting you, and having you at the Harvard Coop was astonishing for me. I mean, that was an astonishing event because there were people there who'd come who I hadn't seen in 50 years.
Cool.
old 50 years, old Cambridge characters that I knew way back when, and yourself, and you added so much. There was so much energy and passion and surprise inside of you, astonishment, which expresses an awful lot of what people are experiencing. But you brought it in your character out for all of us to see and appreciate. So it made a wonderful dramatic counterpoise to the group and to myself. So really thank you for your contributions there, and for the way you hold this, the way you understand it and express it as a global urgency and of global importance. And I'm going to be talking more about that in a moment. As I say, I've had a really interesting conversation in the last couple of days that has added more flavor and more character to how I'm thinking about all of this. But wonderful, cool. Wonderful, Rohit. So
I'm delighted to be here, and delighted to be just engaging with you on this.
Well, likewise, really wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for reaching out, and Lora and Natalie, thank you so much for bringing us all together. So let me turn to Kathy, my dear spouse, who's been at almost as many Golden Civilizations as I have been, conversations, maybe half as many, I suppose, but still many, and has added so much to our thinking about all of this, and good friends to many of us here. Kathy, what would you like to add to this conversation as we've begun it?
First, I'm glad that you explained I was your spouse, in case people were wondering why you were blowing kisses across the...
Oh, I could do it to everybody here.
Okay. So, yeah, I've been involved in many of the conversations. I guess the takeaway is all of the conversations are incredibly inspiring, every single one of them. And everyone in just pretty much across the board feels that way. I think the difficulty is moving it forward. So we've worked with a couple of incredible groups in Charlottesville and in Vermont, who they were just, amazing conversations, but both of those groups are already such activists. I mean, they are literally, one is around climate change primarily, and the other one is all over the place, including a man who had just had a heart attack because he was just extending so far beyond in terms of his activism as well as being a professor. So I think it inspired them and it helped bring them together, but it kind of clear that it wasn't going to move forward as a group because everybody's already involved in their own groups. And then I think the other groups that haven't moved forward is because one leader, such as Julian or Michael, hasn't really stepped forward to take full ownership and move the group forward. So I think that's a real key when I look at the groups that have been successful and as ongoing groups versus some of the ones that we've done, where even though we say who will volunteer and a couple people raise their hands, and even if I've done a little bit of follow-up sort of casually with it, that just taking that next step to pull the group together is challenging. And I think the only other thing I would say is the most interesting group was in Newton. Pamela, you'd be interested in this, where at the very end when I expressed my action step, it became clear that there were a couple of strong, I thought, Trump supporters there, because they said, well, would you lead Trump groups and so forth in this and in mindfulness? So that was very interesting. And I've been saying that I really wanted to bring together and do this with groups that are on opposite sides of the aisle and help the divisiveness. But I have to say, in the moment, it was really challenging for me. So it's one thing to say it, and it's another thing to, even though I covered it quite well, but it took me like 24 hours to settle down from that. So it's interesting in light of just listening a little bit to our impeachment hearings, which have just started live here. And again, just feeling how we're in just two different worlds and how important I think these kind of conversations are. to really try to bridge and bring together groups. So I'd like to get better at being prepared for that.
Lovely. Wow. Again, thank you. Wonderful to share so many stages with you, Kathy Lubar. Kathy having once been and still in many ways being a really extraordinary actress. So interesting to feel I'm on stage with her. Just one thing to share about the just context and the Vermont group that Kathy mentioned, even though as Kathy says, it feels like it's not quite going forward. It's actually my brother Tom. My brother Tom, who's a congregational minister, brought us into his congregation. And Tom has talked life planning with the community at various points, so they're aware of Evoke and the Evoke process. They've actually done it 3 times. So not just once or twice, they've done it 3 times already. Twice I've been there to help facilitate it. They're certainly going to do it again when I come up again. It's possible they will do it again, but it's not like there's this texture of, boy, this is it. We're going to go do it. We're going to meet every other week or once a month, and we're just going to make this into our thing. So Tom is a great leader, but he's got lots of leadership responsibilities. So that's actually one of the patterns. There's a group in St. Louis that I've been with a few times that has done some things on its own. I've been with it twice. Again, we haven't quite gotten it to a threshold where it just launches. And part of that, it's a similar group. They're very politically active, extraordinarily politically active right now. We add something. They took our work and they gave it to the children in the community. And the children loved it, and they loved seeing how the children went through E, V, and O and onto action steps and commitments. So that was really very inspiring. So we're seeing unique kind of approaches to it, even where they aren't necessarily gathering this texture of, we're going to make this a movement. They're adopting it and adapting it in ways that are clearly quite valuable to them in each of these contexts. And one of the things that I was just thinking about when I said to Michael, probably to Michael's chagrin, that the Edinburgh group was slightly sleepier than the afternoon Glasgow business group, was that just thinking about his mother and his aunt, I got the chance to talk with them afterwards, and they told me they held back in the conversation because they didn't want to take it over in some way. They were brilliant. They could have taken it over, and there would have been so much energy in that room just from the 2 of them. So you never know where that's going to come from and what's going to inspire. But so it's doing a lot of good, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about a global perspective in a moment. But I think before I do that, shall I turn it over to you, Julian, and for you to report on what's happening with yours, and then I'll give the global perspective, and then we'll come back and look at how do we think we can make these second meetings and ongoing meetings more, have more tenacity.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, perhaps I might say a few words about what we've been doing in our community as a partial reference point for the question about how can we sustain them.
Absolutely.
Would that be okay, George?
Yeah. And your newest proposal too.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Was that brilliant?
Yeah.
But as ever, what I want to say first is about friendship and comradeship. I mean, see you, Kathy, there, and be next to you, George. It's about comradeship. We've worked together with close friends, families, and it's a joy for me. I just wanted to say something. It might take me just 3 or 4 minutes, this, but I'd go as quick as I can about the story of the community we've built in North London. Will that be okay?
It'd be fantastic. Yeah.
Because it's so exciting, and we're meeting again next Tuesday. We've met 6 or 7 times since last November. I think you've been to a couple of those, George, haven't you? And if I reflected on it and what we've been doing and what we're going to do next, it's a group I guess 25 people have come together. We're usually about 14, 15 in any particular meeting. It comes from a group of about 50, 60 people of friends, clients, colleagues who come from various affiliation groups. My affiliation group, your affiliation group over in London, Life Planning, Blake Society, and so forth. And why have we met so often? Why is the continuing momentum? Well, I think there are 4 things. One, our torch is really strong. It speaks to what we individually want to be doing in the world. There's a really strong sense of affiliation and friendship, both which started, but also which has grown. So, you know, I'm now close friends with Tim Heath, who came from the Blake Society, and I didn't know him, and that sort of mixture of relationship. There's a sense that we do work, this is, I think, your point, Pamela, that enhances what we're all doing in the world and trying to do and encourages us to take more risk and more boldness. And we've stumbled through our dialogue on a theme that represents a collective endeavour over and above what we'd be doing in our own worlds, and therefore it's worth investing in. So I said a bit more about that. Whenever we meet, we do 2 or 3 things. We always talk about supporting each other, about what we're doing in the world, and we talk about that both in our outer world, collaboration, being more frugal, truth to power, but also inner world, about our resilience and conscience and so forth, things like that. We usually take a theme, like transitions, or conscience, or collaboration, and really think about that in terms of our worlds. But what perhaps even more exciting than that for us is that we've generated a theme from our torch that we are looking at collectively. And we took wisdom. We took wisdom because it was in our torch. We took wisdom because we feel there's a deficit in our world. We took wisdom because it feels to be the glue of a golden civilization. And we took wisdom because many of us had a sort of nascent interest in it. So we've inquired into it together, and we've talked about living with purpose and balance of heart and mind and body, and we've talked about reflection, we've talked about transition, we've talked about courage, we've talked about all sorts of things to do with the impermanence of the present moment. How can we make the best of our resources, use our inner resources? And as we inquired on it, we thought, let's challenge ourselves. And it was a modest challenge, which was, let's develop a curriculum for wisdom 6 to 96, i.e. age 6 to 96. And that scared us a bit, but we've stuck with it. And out of that, there are 3 things that are now happening. One is Parul Jani, who comes from a tradition of Vedanta, hosted a session in the house of William Blake on the art of clear thinking. 15 to 20 of us went there. Tim entertained us with some wonderful broth in William Blake's house. As a consequence of that, 4 or 5 of us are meeting in the next 2 weeks to design a program on wisdom, which will be run out of the house of William Blake in 2020, to try it, to experiment it. One of the groups has written on a model for organizational wisdom. She will be hosting a conference in the north of England, Michael, we keep on, so it sounds like Game of Thrones, next spring, and running a program, and she's taking much of the thinking that we've been doing together. And also, we're going to put up, and we need to work with Lora and Natalie on this in the next couple of weeks, we're going to put a page up on the Golden Civilization website, which will be entitled Cultivating Wisdom, because our mission as a group is to, how can we give more people access to resources to access their own wisdom even more, organizationally or individually. So we're going to put up a page, and then we're going to launch a series of Facebook Live conversations around a whole range of themes, like wise leadership, or like a model for organizational wisdom, or responsible business, but also some practice. So I hope we're going to get Scott Zimmerman, Mary's son, from Austin, together with a couple of people in the UK who are working in education and wisdom for children, working with people on responsible business and so forth. So a whole range of themes that we can post, but the thinking develops and it becomes accessible to people. So that's what we're having a go at. It feels, saying it feels important, and it feels there's momentum, and it also feels very experimental. Sometimes we don't know what we're doing, but we're just having a go.
Yeah.
So that's much too long, but I just want to give a sense of, well, the excitement of it. It feels grounded. It feels interesting and possible.
It's extraordinary to hear. I'm sure all of you feel that. Really extraordinary. I've known Julian for a number of years, and in many ways, this seems like a fruition for him, a natural flowering. And the Golden Civilization, in some way, added a platform for you and a community of affiliation where Julian actually could take leadership. I'm just thinking about second conversations and ongoing conversations. It was a platform where you could take leadership, and the theme was one that you were passionate about. So it was a natural thing for you to facilitate, even though there are multiple themes in the group each time. Some people are not as much into the wisdom development of the wisdom frame. But now it's something, and it's gonna, and the Facebook Lives, I hope, will be on our Golden Civilization conversation page on Facebook. And so we're kind of building, doubling the size of those conversations across the planet, really. So very exciting. And I've used Julian's group as an inspirational example for communities all over the world. It doesn't work for every community. As we talked, I just came back from the Masons in Leeds, and it was not a theme that they would have thought of doing, really, particularly. But they have their own perspectives, which I will share in a moment. Anything else? I mean, before I go and talk about kind of a larger context, are there any questions or comments about what Julian's doing that you would like to share? Just one or two, anything at all?
I would just say it's so exciting and encouraging to hear that, Julian. And I wish I was there. I wish I was in London so I could take part in it, because it's a fascinating subject to me. And I was just thinking about Pamela when you talked about the education piece, because that's so much of what your work has been, Pamela, and working with teachers and young, you know, just creating those circles of wisdom and everything. So it might be interesting to have you connect around that. And then I just have a practical question. What time does this call end? I'm not clear. Is it 20 minutes from now at 2? Is that?
Will we be able to make it by then? Lora, I mean, we'd originally set 2 hours, and then we thought that given that it's a small group, that we might be able to do it in an hour. So I think that's where I still am with my frame.
Yep, that's it. Yeah, if we continue on past an hour, for those that are able to, then that's okay too. But the intention was to keep it to an hour.
Okay, good. So, shall I?
I think Pamela is trying to speak, but she's on mute. So we'll wait to hear her.
Please, Pamela.
The only thing I was going to say is that it's really inspiring to hear what you've been able to do, Julian. It sounds like this is a community where there's very strong relationships of many years, and that there's a great deal of trust, and that what's happened within them is sort of building on everybody's resources and needs and responding to that, and then being able to evolve and imagine together what the focus will be. So, and that's hard to achieve. It takes time. Wonderful to hear.
Yeah. I just think the interesting thing about that, Pamela, is I think that's absolutely right. And in the last year, there were sort of different affiliation groups that came in. And, you know, we've got Vedanta, we've got William Blake, we've got financial planning, we've got organizing, and the mix of those is creating something very interesting too. So it's gone from sort of separate affiliation groups, sort of strong relationships which arrived, and then they've been mingling into which is interesting, isn't it? How it morphs, and that's where creativity comes from, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah. I hope that the two of you will get together for a conversation sometime, because you carry a lot of wisdom inside each of you, and a passion and experience around similar things, including facilitating and this passion for democracy that we share.
Sure.
So,
and a couple of other quick things
yeah,
I could for you. I know others might want to come in, but two very strong themes for me from some of the earlier remarks were about children. You know, you were saying that one
Yeah.
group is taking things to
Yep.
children. And also, Kathy, I mean, I think your point about stepping into the other and enclaves is still such a challenge for the group I'm in as well. And it's also the story of British politics and society at the moment about division and camps and not finding ways for discourse across apparently competing views, but actually when you really look at it underneath, there's much more common ground than there is. So I think that's our challenge. I think we can't keep walking away from that and have to step into it, not in a tribal way, but in trying to create dialogue, citizens' assemblies, but real participative democracy where common ground is really explored. I think it's so important, bold though it is and difficult though it is, Kathy, as you did.
So I'd like to pick up from there because that was a theme that Julian and I shared over lunch a little bit earlier. So I don't recall when, well, of course, as a group, we haven't all gotten together ever before, but I can't remember how much I shared of Asia and all, but certainly I've not shared anything with any of you about the North Country other than those of you who are there, Michael, and my close colleagues and love, Lora and Kathy. There continues to be a very strong theme that is really very interesting, and a number of themes that are developing. As you know, the model that we're using is EVOKE, which is the model that we use in life planning, in sophisticated life planning, in the registered life planner designation. And I've argued from early on, and it appears to be accurate, that in the golden civilization, we're now using a circle in our first flip chart, which we call at the top a golden civilization, and we also call it vision. And so that's the second meeting classically in an RLP community. That circle tends to have the same terminology. Whether I'm in Mumbai, that is passionately concerned about poverty, or Hong Kong, that is passionately concerned about democracy, or Northern England, that is passionately on the side of Brexit, or Scotland, where all kinds of polarizations are coming up about identity and culture. The circle is one that is profoundly humane. There's rarely elements of polarization within the golden civilization vision, no matter where I've traveled in the world. Now, I haven't been to rural Kenya. Maybe Kathy, who's going to India in February, can lead one in rural India. That would be something quite extraordinary. We should talk to Shantam about it. But my hunch is there are nuances that shift from culture to culture. So in Mumbai, the nuance, there was more leaning toward, in that vision, concerns about equality and poverty. Same thing in the obstacles and action steps. In Hong Kong, the leaning was toward, and with great vulnerability, democratic freedom. So, but the same issues of kindness, of collaboration, of vitality, of creativity, of community, these are everywhere. The virtues, integrity, authenticity, these are everywhere, wherever we go. This is the vision. And it's one of these truths that feel almost too simple.
Sure.
And too obvious. But I think that what we're seeing, if we can hold to it and demonstrate it and claim that space, it's actually a very powerful truth. people use it politically, but what we're finding is that it's really true. And it's not about breaking into political camps, that we hold a common vision of what is it to be in civilization. We hold it all over the world. Now, that said, it's very interesting that obstacles can be quite different from community to community. Because in obstacles, you're trying to get at, and in actions as well. In both obstacles and actions, we're prioritizing more. Where are the issues that people really want to focus on?
Mhm.
And there you are going to see more of the poverty issues in Mumbai and the democracy issues in Hong Kong. And you may see some political issues. Certainly they came up in the Leeds meeting of the Masons, some political issues. There were some really surprising things that happened. Leeds was very surprising. I was really looking forward to it. I had expected it to be filled with Brexit, and I was surprised to hear people talk about sustainable planet. I was surprised to hear to discover as we weighed what obstacles are most critical to address. The number one obstacle that was actually tied with arrogance and corporate greed and corruption, the number one obstacle was religion. I was really stunned to hear that up there. And what was surprising, going from group to group, going back to Mumbai, there I am. Rohit, what is it that the Mark put here on the forward? What's that called?
It's called a bindi. Yeah, is one. There are a couple different terms. The bindi is one term for that. Typically, it's when a woman puts it, and when she's dressed well. Another in the case of a religious ceremony, it's sometimes called a tikka, which is.
This was a bindi. This was a woman dressed in a sari. She was doing a golden.
That's a bindi. Yeah.
Yeah, Golden Civilization conversation. She's a spiritual dancer, a religious dancer. And when we were going around obstacles, the number one thing she said was religion. Now, of course, right now, the politics in India have a lot of religion in them. So you can understand that. But here are two totally different communities in radically different parts of the world. And I've seen this religion come up in St. Louis. I've seen it come up in California as a major obstacle. And I'm always a little hesitant because I'm worried that some people will be passionately religious in the group, and I want them to feel safe as well as we share it. But in Leeds, it was number one, up there with corruption. So very, very, very interesting. Was there, I want to talk about this fellow, Robert Downer. Was there anything else in this group that you thought was useful to talk about the global understanding?
I think it's very helpful. Well, let me just make one small point on that.
Yeah.
I just think, George, that the voice of what you hear across the world is one important ingredient about sustaining us. So for us and many others to hear that voice regularly, I think is part of sustaining.
Great. Great, wonderful, wonderful. Then I should also share that one of the major obstacles that people talk, and one of the major action steps, is education. So those of you that are working in education, this is felt quite strongly. Not every group, but there of all the obstacles, that seems to be the one that comes up. And again, was a surprise to me that it would be so significant, more significant often than corruption, than politics, than corporate greed, education, and feeling that it's so important. And of course, in the action steps, a lot of times mindfulness comes up. So those are kind of common themes that I'm seeing. And of course, what we're aiming for here in a minute is trying to understand, how do we take all of this and move forward. And Kathy's spoken about some ideas about how we do it and how it was that Julian's group has come together. We've talked about, and I've got some other thoughts. But let me share a couple of things, other things that I have recently been thinking about that are very interesting. So I always, and as you read the book, you get this flavor, but I don't know that I've been totally really clear about it as I'm coming to be. But in obstacles now, we have the obstacles page, and then we have a circle in the middle of it for inner obstacles, and around the outer portion is outer obstacles. So clearly our thinking has been developing that obstacles are very valuable to think about in terms of inner obstacles and outer obstacles. And it does turn out that this is really true. And one of the things, again, that's been quite astonishing to me is how often the inner obstacles have more weight in communities all over the world. And again, they're the same, whether you're going with a community that's more conservative and more right or left. They're the same obstacles: greed, fear, ignorance, belief systems, clinging, arrogance. It's the same combination of things. There are many others that fit in there in very interesting ways. So that's also, I think, very hopeful. And what I have been thinking, and really way back to the book, but it's been getting stronger and stronger, is that really I see this as developing in two ways our actions moving forward. One is, what are the interactions? And of course, I'm a strong proponent of mindfulness. Many people are, but you know, in a facilitation, you bring out whatever the community has. Mindfulness has been something that has been very interesting in almost all of these communities, interesting to almost all of these communities. So that is one element. And again, knowing that there's something that nurtures us from the depths and begins to bring us closer and closer to virtues just from a practice, just from an inner practice. The other thing that I've been wrestling with, and because it's so complex, is how do we address, you know, again, the issue is we want to do this in a generation. And the compelling issue around a generation comes from the climate more than anything. But in addition to that, we see how rapidly hierarchies of power are now developing and how quickly they can turn to the dark side. Just look at Facebook, which has wonderful things. I use it all the time, but it has incredible darkness to it in terms of fake news and the unwillingness to pull political ads away or untruthful ads away. So, but what economists call negative externalities, they're developed out of the way capitalism is classically grown. And so the question for me has been, how do we get at that? And how do we get at it in a generation? How do we get at it in a way that we can do it over a 20-year time frame, but that is the least threatening, but the most effective of actually making this transformation happen so that it's accomplished. And what you see as you think about these hierarchies of power, and you can see it right now with the popularity in America in particular of the polarization happening now, thinking about billionaires on this side and the rest of us over here on this side, as we're thinking about inequality and excesses of wealth. You realize, of course, that that is where the opposition is going to occur. It's going to occur where the centers of power exist and where the greatest power exists. And so, you know, as you think about the issues of humanizing, in financial terms, the term that we use in the financial world, particularly in America, but it's very popular in England, become very popular in England as well, and becoming popular all over the world, is the term fiduciary. And in America, it's a huge issue that none of the banks and none of the brokerage firms want to become fiduciaries. But it's obvious that fiduciary means placing your client's interest first. And why would you not want to do that? I mean, isn't that the humane way to go? And it seems obvious to us, but the reasons are having to do with the efficiencies of capital. That the most efficient way toward making profit, and making profit so that it's sustainable and so that it's predictable and reliable, is to minimize costs. And what fiduciary does is it adds regulatory burdens that can be significant costs. So so it's wonderful to be in the financial services industry, to actually see this. It hasn't been developing, it's in a developing argument, but we've been losing it really, I think, because it was established way back in 1940. But the reason that it's helpful is that it's helpful to think, where are the forces of opposition toward making a humanity blossom within the factories of capitalism, of economies? How do we make that blossom? And what are the arguments that need to happen? So I had a wonderful conversation with a man named Robert Dellner, D-E-L-L-N-E-R. He comes from a fascinating family. I'm not going to give you his history much, except to say that he, in a way, he's not part of the family, but the family itself, he was. And the family had a huge corporation, huge even by American standards. And he has turned to psychology and the psychology of money. He's read The 7 Stages many years ago. And he came to me with a model that is based on, and Pamela, do you need to leave at 2 or can you stay? You do, oh darn. Because what Dellner's model is a model that has these wonderful flowerings of starting with the inner core that we start with in our golden civilization. And then he's thinking about it in terms of impact investing. And I look at it and I just go, this is golden civilization. We need to bring this model into every corporation. And it's a model that has a relationship and planet Earth as being one. There are 4 quadrants. There's a quadrant that has to do with knowledge and science. There's a quadrant that has to do with inspiration and culture. And then there's a quadrant that has to do with economics and our mercantile commercial nature. And my sense is that we need a flower like that is a flower from golden civilization. And his model is just one of many that might arise. But I suddenly realized that we can do that. We can create that model or a series of models and bring them in and begin to experiment with them within corporations. The corporations will squawk a bit because it causes inefficiencies in terms of just driving for the profit. But if we know that this is where we have to go, and all corporations have to join in, because eventually that would be the case, we're beginning to find, well, what is the engine that is closer to a human heart inside the center of a corporate or a government or a nonprofit entity, an institutional entity? So this was terribly exciting for me, talking with him, seeing his model, and begin to evolve from my own perspective how that, where it is that we might go as a community. And he could help us with this, but I think there are also probably many other groups that are working on this in the impact investing arena. Julian's worked on this in corporate life a great deal. Pamela, you might have worked on this some in the democratic arena as well, in the governance arena. So anyway, so that's what's exciting me right now, is making this more human flower, but that is at the center of a machinery, of the machinery of civilization, the institutional machinery of civilization. So I wanted to share that and open that to conversation. Ultimately, we want to come back now, though, to how do we get second meetings? How do we get an ongoing, meetings to be ongoing? Pamela, do you have any final words before you leave?
Just one thing that this is so interesting that actually Kathy in her first remarks, and so nice to see you, Kathy. I was thinking that there are all these groups that are passionate about issues, and this is around the world. And it seems to me that that they have forgotten the human flowering that has animated them to even be passionate about these issues. Yeah. And so is there something in the golden civilization structure that is not going to replace that activism or that focus on climate change or gun control or whatever it is, but that really adds to the human flowering and the way that the work is done being something that is consistent with this humanity and this human flowering? That's what came to mind.
That's so beautiful. And I think that part of the thing that we need to do with that is make that human flowering part of our understanding of what a golden civilization is. Thank you.
I just had two thoughts, Pamela. Oh, sorry, but just two things that sparked in me. One is, what if we did go to intact groups who were already working on things and did this just as one meeting for them as an inspiration and also as a way to connect them to all the other groups that are doing really good work in their areas, to feel like we're all more part of, a community, like a community and a vision, rather than trying to start new groups, which is more difficult. So.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's something that can be brought in so that it's wonderful to have the kind of group and ongoingness that Julian's describing. I think those may be rarer for many of the reasons that people have talked about, but I think that this could be a real contribution. So anyway. Any
groups in particular that you think of that we should connect?
Oh, there are so many. We're starting a Mothers Out Front group in the community where I live, which is now a national climate activist group. But there are many. I could think of them, but anyway, I'm going to have to run. But so nice to see everybody.
Nice to see you, Pamela. We might pick your brain a bit more on how we might do this. I think that's a very exciting idea. Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
So, very interesting. Kathy, do you want to go a little bit further with that? So your thought is go in and offer just a one-time group experience where, and I love this term human flowering. I know in some way I just brought it up, but Pamela is the one who's nailing it. So I'm going to always think of it as Pamela's term. How are you thinking that this might be designed? And is this something that that Lora and I and Natalie might work on?
Well, a couple of thoughts come to mind. One is the group that Hugh and you and a couple of other people are starting, this online group to bring mindfulness to activist groups. Right. So one thing to talk to Hugh about would be, would this be an offering that you could also offer to the different, whoever comes to that meeting, because they're all going to be part of activist groups. So to be able to offer, say, to come in and to sort of re-inspire, to bring mindfulness in, but also then to take it a step further and have an inspirational meeting, rather than we just come in if we're working on gun control and we immediately go to tactics and but you burn out. That's the whole reason you want to offer mindfulness to these groups, is that you burn out, and like Pamela was saying, you forget the original inspiration for doing the work. And it can all get kind of heavy and just one more stressful thing on your to-do list. So kind of like as a sort of coupling with the mindfulness, an inspiring conversation, and then it could all be linked via the website too, every group that participated, and that we're just all part of, like you said, the human flowering for this, common vision. So I don't know, I think that's the main thought.
I wonder, I mean, it's so, I love it. And I wonder if it's also, to me, as you're saying it, I'm also thinking that going into corporations, boards, going in at any level and just saying, this is what we're really about. And this human flowering, and how would you do that here? Just beginning to initiate that in the corporate world as well as in the activist world.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I think it's a little harder to get into corporate board, but maybe starting with some nonprofit boards that might be more open to that idea. Yeah.
Yep. Great. Anybody else? So again, we were going to talk about having second and third and ongoing meetings, and I think we've gotten some ideas around that because it clearly around affiliation, around leadership, passion of particular facilitator. Even though, Julian, it wasn't your, I mean, you moved toward wisdom because there was group intrigue. It wasn't just you.
I just thought of another thing is if you offered it to different, I don't know about this, but different political campaigns. So you've got all these now, especially with 2020 coming up, you've got all these headquarters, like the Warren headquarters in Massachusetts probably has, one major one, but, and then all the other candidates and stuff, but maybe offering at political headquarters, because you're constantly got volunteers coming together. And this could be just a wonderful way to sort of kick off volunteer groups in these different political arenas that are naturally coming together anyway. And if you volunteer, I'm happy to, we could come in and do this for you as a way to, it's really a team building. I mean, it's an inspiration and it's building the team, it's building the relationships. That could be an amazing offering, and probably something that would be easy. There'd probably be a lot of responsiveness to that, I think, because there's just a big volunteer network, mostly with a couple of people who are on staff.
So Kathy, I know you've got a lot of political passion right now, and would you be willing to do some work around this, some thought around this with Lora and Natalie and myself?
Sure, yeah.
Because I think that's a dynamite idea. I mean, we are in war on territory, but there are other groups as well. I mean, there's no reason that we should just be on one candidate's side. It'd be wonderful to do it with all candidates.
Right. I imagine that, I mean, don't all of the candidates, all the Democratic candidates have headquarters in all the states?
I think so. So we could actually touch with each of the candidates.
Yeah, I think they do. I mean, I don't know, probably the bigger ones, the ones that are at the top of the.
Yeah. And certainly New Hampshire will have ones for everybody.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, well, that would be wonderful and be very exciting. So that's, and wherever we're doing this, we are seeding the possibility of ongoing groups.
I mean, another thought would be, well, I don't know if they would be interested. I was just thinking about the boards, like every public school, do they? I mean, every charter public school has a board of directors, like Parker does. I don't know if every public school, probably, I don't know if it's just charters, but again, doing it with boards of schools, I don't know if people would be interested, but they, as part of their off-site retreat or team building, but you'd have to somehow connect it more directly to their visions too, like how they, I don't know. That's kind of get
the term that you've added here that I love because it's so powerful and so much in use is team building. I mean, we've never thought of this as a team building exercise before. Oh, here's Louis. Hey. That's a really powerful idea that we've got a team building exercise that's really powerful and that brings people together. in spite of all the polarizations that are happening, and gives us a feeling that we're really doing good work in the world. I love that. Yeah. Great. Anybody else? Michael, how does all this sit with you? And I wish I could be there to be with your ongoing conversation.
Yeah, so interesting. So I've pitched another meeting for the 13th of December, which is the day after our general election, and I pitched the commitment to be more politically active, which was something that came out in the Edinburgh meeting. So, you know, whether you donate to a political party, or you join a political party, or you post online, or, you know, do something, as well as vote, you know, on the 12th. So I thought that was quite an easy one to get started, and topical. But where it goes after that, I don't know. I haven't thought. I thought I would leave it up to somebody else to pick a topic after that. But do you tend to have one person leading the group, or?
Well, we
or
don't
is it?
know. It's so early in terms of this. We don't know clearly, but so far, if there is one person that kind of takes ownership, then I think that enables other people to come in if they want to, and share that leadership. I mean, Julian's inviting me back, so I'm going to come back. But so the more that you can, if there's any way that you thought through what you would like to see out of this group, I mean, you'll see what emerges. But is there some way that your growth as a community leader, as being active and engaged in issues, in a supportive environment of loving friends and colleagues, is there any way that you would like to see that go forward? And if so, is there a frame that you might have that you begin to think that fits your life plan, that's somewhere in there with your life plan? I don't know if Julian has anything you want to add. But it's because it's a wonderful, I think that's what was great for Julian, was it just, wow, you mean I can actually do something with this community that's coming together without kind of a command and control, but a facilitation of what comes naturally.
Yeah.
With flowering leadership.
There's a number of people who have taken things.
Yeah, developing. I don't know if you have any thoughts or.
Well, I mean, the political one, be more politically engaged, be more politically active, is kind of my where I am at the moment anyway. But then I guess climate change and sustainability would be another one I'm interested in, and there was definitely interested in that as well. So maybe that's the next one. But
yeah, I would run with that. I think that when I met Julian, the one thing that I noticed was that he wanted to be more politically engaged, more edgy, more active. And this has given him an additional way of actually doing that. And I think likewise for you, it's a wonderful structure that you could very gently go forward and make a difference that's more powerful than just you as an individual.
Right, yeah.
Exciting.
I'll keep you posted.
Yeah, I'm excited about to hear about it. Yeah, great. Anybody else? This has been inspiring for me. Louis, Anita, anything you want to add? Lora?
He's on mute.
Yeah. Louis, you're on mute, by the way. So.
Yeah, they wrote that they may not be able to actually participate in the conversation.
Okay.
But I think the team building aspect makes a lot of sense to me, and working with intact groups. The concept of forming groups and keeping those groups together seems difficult, and that's what we've been experiencing. And as Pam said, that perhaps Julian has been able to have this like vortex of wonderful kind of coincidences come together that has allowed him to create this ongoing group that we look to as an example. And we want to be able to continue to encourage that. But if we can go to groups that already exist, as we've been doing with the different churches that are very active, and look to others, this could be really powerful inspirational fodder that keeps them going towards the visions that they've developed, but also expands their way of thinking. Because I think what's unique about this is that we're thinking about civilization, and so many groups pick a part of that, but we're looking at the whole. And I think that that is where there's just more energy, and that's what's really exciting.
Yeah, very much so, very much so. Anybody else? This is I've come away with a lot from our meeting. Yeah. Julian, anything you want to add in closing?
I just think that last insight from Kathy, Lora, is fantastic.
Yeah, great. Natalie, anything you want to add?
I would say I think it's really interesting, like the idea of like going to different organizations that are already intact as well, just because I feel like the way that the civilization, like the golden civilizations conversations are occurring right now, it sometimes it has to do with like people electing to like move forward with this idea. So you kind of have like a self-fulfilling prophecy of like maybe like more liberal-minded individuals or more people who are like politically active. Like whereas if you go to like a corporate organization as like a team building activity, you might get the idea, you might get the opportunity to bring in people who have different political sensibilities or who have different like backgrounds and ideas, and force them to have conversations together that they might not necessarily assume that they would have commonalities among those groups of people. But then, you know, like because of the groups that you're choosing, it's just kind of natural that people who have different sensibilities might come together.
Great. Wonderful. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that summary as well. And I want to add one more thing, because I think we've been underselling a bit the ongoing group. So I want to describe, so first of all, we've got Michael as an amazing example just in the last couple of weeks of someone who's kind of stepped up to the plate and is venturing forward. But I want to share a little bit more about Glasgow, how I saw Glasgow, and also how I saw Leeds develop, because I think, and again, I'm looking to Lora and Natalie and any help we can get from any of the rest of you in the closing minutes here. We had in Glasgow, there were actually, in addition to Michael, who's going back to Edinburgh, we had 3 strong leaders raise their hands and say, I'd be interested. And there was a 4th who was kind of maybe. So the 3 that were strong leaders, there was a kind of a wild guy who talked about this being revolutionary. And he wanted to really help create the revolution. And he's the man, young man, Barney or Barry, Harmony or Honeyman. And you can look at his post on the Facebook Golden Civilization page, because he did a marvelous namaste to myself and to Golden Civilizations and a commentary on the experience in Glasgow. So he's very interested in doing, kind of trying to set them up. He's got a Buddhist community that he's connected with, but he's also a financial advisor. He's in the financial community. So there's a lot of texture. There was a lot of excitement there. What we have to do is try and capture that. And I'm looking to Lora and Natalie, because I'm hoping that they, certainly in collegiality with myself, will all be able to manage some inspiration that he tries them and tries to do a few. I'm hopeful. He was so enthusiastic that I thought, I'm going back to Glasgow. And I'm going to go back when Kathy and I are going to come over in late April, and then I'm going to stay on in May. And I thought, I'm going to offer a trip up there and see where he's gotten to, and see if the Buddhist community that he's working with is willing to do something where I even do some meditation possibly. They may have their own school, and that wouldn't be possible. But to look at various communities, he sounded like he was willing to try and seed it in different communities. So that was one thing that was kind of very exciting to see. And one of the things, as I said, losing our staff person, Caitlin, meant that there were a lot more stresses and pressures on our staff. so that we weren't able to do as much follow through as we might. But now my hope is we'll be able to pick that up as Natalie, who's just barely into her second week, gets her feet under her, and that Lora and Mary Ellen and myself and Natalie can really pitch in and help get some of these more excitement into these people who are intrigued with doing second. So there was another person there, Michael, that you might remember, who is the tallest guy there. He was taller than you are. And Michael looks short just in the way he's put the camera, but he's a tall man. And yeah, there you go. And I can't remember his name. Do you remember what his name was? He worked at Morgan Stanley. He had a beard.
Yeah, Matthew.
Matthew. So we need to get Matthew's email and Barry's email and all. And the other, so Matthew there are a series of diversity groups at Morgan Stanley. And he said he was in charge of them. So he wanted to introduce it to all of them and see if they would take it out individually into their communities. So this is someone who might actually spread it community to community to community to community. This is one of the reasons I was really impressed with Glasgow. They had an incredible energy that I was stunned by, was not prepared for at all. So there are two people who have a lot of energy. You're talking about making multiple groups coming out. We need to capture that energy somehow and connect with that energy and see what we can do. And then there was a third person who was quieter, who was a real help. Michael will remember him well and knows him probably much from old times, but who was kind of the head of the CISI there in Glasgow. And he was quiet, but he contributed a lot in the meeting. And I kept looking at him and wondering, was he really strong or not? I couldn't quite tell, but at the end he came up, this is Colin.
Yeah.
And Colin came up and said, I'm very interested. And he said, moreover, Michael, he said, I want to bring you back. He said, we can get a group, I think through Santander, we can get a space that will house 100 people. I want to bring you back for that space. When can you come? And so that's something, again, that Lora and Natalie are going to follow up with. But he's probably going to bring back, and I'll probably do a similar thing to what I already did with financial advisors, with 100 people. But he was very interested. He raised his hand as well in terms of co-facilitating. And maybe the three of them together, we might get them to co-facilitate with the group of financial advisors again. He thought that was possible, that in a month or so, they might gather together and with his facilitation with one or two of the other fellows, or possibly yourself. So there were three strong voices. So here we are, we've been kind of dismissing this ongoing thing. I want to say that there's strength here. There's strength here. And what's that?
It's both and.
It's both and. We just haven't had the capacity to follow through, and we're leaving them hanging. For me to go and do a dynamic meeting and then just abandon them, that's challenging. Even though Lora and Caitlin and I really developed quite a bit of backup material on the website, I think they need hands to hold as they go forward and inspirational energy around this. And it would be great, I'm looking at Michael and Julian, if occasionally you guys could be involved with that as well when they're nearby, when they're relatively
Glasgow's nearby.
Glasgow's nearby, fantastic. So to add additional energy, to give them people to talk with and inspire and all of that. Yeah, great. So so that's, so I wanted to say that, and then I wanted to bring up Leeds, because Leeds was, the challenge. Leeds was Masons. In America, we don't understand Masons, but Masons in England, there's the thought that they're quite conservative. It's an old ritualistic tradition. I experienced it as a male drinking club in a lot of ways, but they have ritual, they have ideals that they believe in, virtues that they believe in, including human connection and integrity. So they have virtues that are really quite wonderful. But I thought I was going into basically strong Brexit territory, our version of Trump territory perhaps, and I was eager to go. And yeah, they did have drinks before, and so it was more of a camaraderie, male kind of experience there. But you know what their golden civilization echoed? Every golden civilization we've seen so far. And they were the ones that came up with religion. And they were ones that came up very strongly with arrogance and corruption, and at the top of our institutions. So they were right on in terms of what we're seeing and feeling everywhere, and they were strong with those opinions. And out of that group, there were 4 people who raised their hand that they would volunteer to co-facilitate going forward. Again, Nigel's going to be the person to carry this forward, along hopefully with some help from Lora and Natalie, perhaps, to encourage. And he's about to go on a week's vacation, I think, but or is on a week's vacation. But what I want to say is we're getting volunteers at practically, not all of them, but almost every one of these things has 2, 3, 4 volunteers saying, I'd lead, I'd co-facilitate this. And I'm asking people not to lead, but co-facilitate, because that's easier to say yes to. And then we figure out how we get a couple of them together. So I want to say that this is, there's a lot of hope for this ongoing, much as this new idea of team building and entering into organizations, corporations, nonprofits, activist groups, spiritual communities, and doing team building and bringing this human flowering into rigid and burnout communities that are trying to do good things. These are all really great possibilities. So, and I'm seeing Louis nod his head as if he's got something to share. We are probably nearing the end of our time together, but Louis, is there anything you'd like to, how does this sound? Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds great and great and familiar. That's good. First of all, sorry that I couldn't be here all the time. I had to rush through heavy traffic to see if I could see the end of this, and then I couldn't even. I logged on, but I couldn't even listen to the first bit that I logged on to. So, but I heard from the part that you were talking about your last adventures in Glasgow and Leeds. So that's great to hear, and great to hear that. And I wouldn't expect any other experiences really, because everywhere where I've had these conversations so far, it's always the same. You see that wherever you go and you start talking about what really people aspire to for their communities, there's so much commonalities. It's so clear that that's where we are united instead of divided. And although so many people play on to try to keep us divided, it's so important that there is another voice that keeps us united. And maybe to simply to stay in the golden civilization realm, one of the surprises that I had just the last week or week before was that I have had quite a few golden civilizations meetings, a bit informal, some a bit more formal. But I never invited anyone to, because I kind of tend to only do these kind of things in the business realm, in the advisors, business advisors, mortgage advisors. That's kind of the people that I get. And I was talking to a group of people, and there was something going on about the fact that everything is going so fast, and they can't get to stop and really consider what is really happening. So I mentioned something about well, there's many companies that give people opportunities to do mindfulness, because that gives people opportunity to be more creative and more in sync with their environment. And to my surprise, they were quite interested, and they invited me to send out a message to the staff whether people would be interested in having a session on mindfulness. And within a day, I had like 15, 16 people registering for a meeting just simply on mindfulness. And I'm planning to take that towards golden civilization as well, of course. So I start with the mindfulness, and then I'll continue the conversation about virtues. And from virtues, you get to the golden civilization. So I'm now going to try to reverse this. But I would seriously not have expected so many people, just without any persuasion from their own accord, being interested and really wanting to engage in a conversation or in a meeting on mindfulness. So I feel that's quite hopeful as well.
Beautiful, Louis. And we are really at the end of this, but I want to share with you that part of what you missed, you would have been very intrigued with, and you and I are going to have some time in the next few days to talk. And the thing that I want to emphasize is that what's been added, and it came out of a conversation that weaved through all of us, but Pamela, Seigle, and Kathy in particular were strong on this, is the notion of team building, of golden civilization conversations as team buildings, even within corporations, that allows a sense of human flourishing, of human flowering to develop within a corporate setting, and reminds us of kind of the human nature of where we all come from and where we all connect.
Yeah.
I'll be glad to share much more of that when you and I meet, maybe for breakfast before the Life Planning Mastery on Friday. Or
I'm in London tomorrow night, and well, of course, Friday morning we could meet at the regular Preds, no problem.
Yeah, good.
So and Saturday, whatever.
And maybe Thursday night we touch base briefly. We'll see. Yeah, excellent, Louis. Excellent.
Looking forward to it.
Me too. Me too. All right. Well, Rohit, thank you so much for coming on board for this.
Thank you, George. Can I share just one quick thought, just reaction to this?
Yeah.
I love this idea that the teamwork and the idea of this human flowering, and I wonder if there's a place and something and a role in these discussions that you're having for an ability for different groups of people to disagree on things and have something intellectually where you know, there are people who are for guns and there are people who are against guns, and there are different reasons for both, but have this spirit of, we have to be able, we want to, actually not have to, but we really want to, this is part of our sort of common humanity. We want to have a way to talk about this and discuss it and come to ways that we sort of understand the other point of view. And I wonder if there's that may or may not fit in the corporate context, but I wonder if there's places, at least in broader in society. I feel like there's such a need for that, and it's this combination of an ability to disagree, but this humanity that everyone was talking about on the call.
So Rohit, I have several thoughts about that. One is that, and it's a wonderful, well, first of all, wonderful idea and wonderful thought. My first thought is that it's something I've been passionate about facilitating and making happen from the very beginning of this conception. And the way that I've thought of it is that we facilitate both sides within the group. It may be that 5 people are over on this side and only 2 people are over on that side. And
Right.
that 2 people are like, I don't know, you know, but to encourage the 5 people to get together and put together whatever they have and whatever they want to share, and encourage the 2 people to put together something. Not that it's an argument, but so it's like it's a scientific conference where they're presenting their findings and what they understand. And remember that each of these are not hierarchical groups necessarily, but each group, a subgroup, can go off and take action steps within. So each of those groups could be taking action steps that feel right to them. And I would want to support that. So that's one thought, but it's just a general thought. My other thought is that maybe you're the man. That maybe, just like Julian has taken this notion of wisdom, and it's been his passion, and facilitation and working with groups and all. Maybe you're the man as you develop your own Golden Civilization group to actually experiment and find the way to make that happen. And then share that with all of us so that we have greater strength around it all. I mean, that's really what these Golden Civilizations are meant to do, is to strengthen all of us.
Yeah, that's great. Very
Can
cool.
I just make one short remark on this?
Yeah.
I literally had this conversation, and what I did is I asked both parties to write down what would be the most important thing, why they even want this. So the party who wanted guns and the party who would not want at all. And in essence, what they both wrote down was, I want to feel safe.
Yeah. Yes.
So the beauty of that was that I was completely able to unite them on that. So I said, well, so would you want the other one to feel safe? Oh, yes. And would you want the other one to feel? Yes, of course, I understand that. So the one thing that maybe divides you is that you both have a different idea of how to be safe. But you both want to be safe. So let's find a way.
So Louis, let me just share another. So I think that's a wonderful, what Louis just did is an example, and I wish we could institutionalize these examples of how to do these things. Rohit, you may be the man that does this and put all of these together. But one of the things I did, I was in a family situation where two people were arguing about, is it AK-47s? You know, the machine gun, or AR-15s or whatever they are. So they were arguing about a piece of legislation, about how that legislation should be crafted. And one was on the slightly conservative and one was on the slightly liberal side of that in America. So they gave me room to say something, and I said, well, look, let's back up for a moment. And you all know the work of the Golden Civilization. Let me ask you, in a Golden Civilization, what would it be? And they both said there would be no weapons in a Golden Civilization. So it brought them into a common objective immediately in a really interesting way. So the Golden Civilization offers a wonderful frame. What Louis just suggested is a wonderful frame. I think there are many ways of doing this. And then just having papers presented in more of a scientific way to the group as a whole, but as a small part of what the whole meeting is about. I think all of these things are powerful and valuable. Yeah.
And just very briefly for me, George, not to overburden you, Rohit, but 2 points. The whole citizens' assembly movement, dialogue across opposing views, is such a strong reference point for this, I think. And I was talking yesterday, actually, to a conflict mediator, conflict resolution consultant who uses a frame of courage in such conversations and sort of 4 steps. And it spoke very strongly to me. One is the courage to turn up and step into such a conversation. Step 2, to truly listen. Step 3, courage step, to be ready to change your mindset. Step 4, to be ready to take action as a consequence. I really like that.
Great.
You know, turn up and change mindset. It sounds simplistic when I do it quickly, but that is a very courageous ladder of conversational steps, isn't it?
Fabulous. Wow.
One thing I would add to that, I was just in a diversity, equity, and inclusion conversation over a couple of days, and I would add the courage to feel discomfort probably in these conversations, that if we brought the two sides together. And then the other wild thought I had, this is when Rohit was talking, and I was thinking, well, what groups need it the most? I was thinking Congress and Parliament and how outrageous that was. But then I was thinking about how, there are mindfulness, we know 2 of them, teachers from the States who go over and do mindfulness with Parliament. And then there are also like Tara Brock in DC, who has gone into Congress and done mindfulness. So maybe it's not so outrageous. I mean, maybe there would be some way. I mean, it's really far-fetched, but I just watching them, I just go, God, they need this soap.
Mhm.
There are these common, common visions and desires underneath, but it's just so polarized that they're tearing up our both of our countries. So
Mhm.
I don't know.
Beautiful. Yeah, beautiful. So, well, this is a new arena, and wonderful to see how it goes, whether from citizens assembly or the individual ways of working and change. What would be lovely in a golden civilization if we would all learn from each other and find a way to bring what we have learned to others around the globe. Thank you, Rohit, for
Yeah, these are great ideas. I love them.
joining us. All right, are we at closure? Yeah. Thank you so much. It's been wonderful, inspiring to be here with you. And I know we'll be talking again soon. Go well. It's time. It's time for us to make it work.
Cheerio.
Bye.
Bye. See you later.
Bye.